Have you ever noticed that different people have different attitudes toward work? I heard about a congregation, for instance, who had the same pastor for many years, and when he resigned, they called a new pastor, and that person had new ideas about church leadership. And for instance, the first suggestion that the new pastor made to the council was that they needed to hire a part-time person to take care of the church lawn. Well, this got some people riled. I'll have you know, Parson, one person said indignantly, that our former pastor used to mow the yard and take care of the churchyard. I know that, said the new pastor. I called him, and he doesn't want to do it anymore. Different people have different attitudes toward work. It was like a boss was getting irate with a lazy clerk, and as he fiddled around, the boss got more irate, and finally he's had enough that you're the most useless person in this firm. Name me just one thing that you contribute to this company. Well, after thinking a little bit, the clerk said, well, when I go on vacation, there isn't any extra work to foist on other people. Know anyone like that? I've known some people like that in my lifetime. Their attitude about work is just a little different. They're like the man who said, I can't stand seeing an uncut lawn. And someone standing next to him says, why? What's the problem? You know, I mowed my lawn once, and it does no good. It grew back, so I stopped doing it anymore. And the first person said, that's horrible. I couldn't stand an uncut lawn. The second person, well, what's to stand? I mean, what do you have against what happens naturally? Well, it's not natural for a lawn to be uncut, the first person said. Well, think of it this way, the second guy said, who did the landscaping for the Garden of Eden? Well, God did, of course. Well, God does the landscaping for my yard, too, the second person said. Yes. Well, that's a different perspective, isn't it? A Tennessee farmer said that lightning struck his old shed. He said that was great because it saved him the trouble of tearing it down. And when it rains, it washes off his implements in his car, saving him the trouble of having to do that too. Well, the neighbor asked him, what are you doing now? He said, well, I'm waiting for an earthquake to shake the potatoes out of the ground. Well, sometimes, you know, this being Father's Day, sometimes fathers, sadly, get a reputation for thinking like that. It reminds me of a family who, the children, they convinced the mother to get a hamster. And so they went to the pet store, brought home the hamster, named the hamster Danny. And, you know, the deal was they could have the hamster if the killer would take care of it, right? You can guess what happened. After a few months, the interest waned, and guess who's taking care of the hamster? Mother, right? So the mother made some calls and made some arrangements, and then she gathered the children together, broke the news that it was time for Danny to go. And, well, she was surprised that they took it reasonably well. But there were some comments. Like one of the children said, well, he's been around for a long time. We're going to miss him. Well, yes, that's true. But, you know, there's another place he can go, and so he needs to go. Well, the other one said, well, maybe if he wasn't so messy, or if he didn't eat so much, maybe he could stay. Well, no, see, I'm the one taking care of him, so I'm the one that has to say, so he goes. So, no more talking. Go upstairs, get his cage, and bring Danny down to the car. We'll take him to his new home. And then at that moment, the light turned on, and the children, with tearful outrage, said, Danny, I thought you were talking about Daddy. But, you know, in all reality, this situation is not just confined to men and fathers. You know, sometimes, you know, women have their own struggles with work issues. Like, for instance, there was a fellow standing next to a mother and a son in a grocery store, And the little boy went and grabbed something off the shelf and wanted to put it in the cart, and Mother said, "Oh, no, no, dear, put that back. You have to cook that." Well, people definitely have different attitudes about work. And if you don't believe me, think about this Los Angeles Times article, letter to the editor. A person wrote in concerning work, and this is what they wrote, quote, "There has been a lot of criticism of people who do not want to work, especially when they are collecting welfare. Most people prefer to work, well, that's fine, but others may prefer to sit in the park, go to the beach, and observe wonders of nature. Now, those who dislike work should not be penalized by depriving them of the benefits of society. There's plenty for all. Everyone does not feel the same way about working. Some have built-in feelings that make it very unpleasant for them to work, especially when it is required. Now, this could be looked upon as a handicap. And we don't punish others with handicaps, so we shouldn't punish people who have a problem with working. Our society provides for handicapped people, and so we should do the same for people who have a problem or dislike with work. Why can't we just live and let live? And everyone follow their own style." Well, that's the end of the quote. That's kind of a different attitude, to say the least, isn't it? My guess is, though, sadly, there are probably a lot of people who would agree with that kind of perspective. But I should say I'm not agreeing with what this writer said, but I want to begin this morning by saying and stressing that you and I have a religious responsibility to goof off from time to time. It's true. And that may sound kind of strange coming from the pulpit, but it is true. We have a responsibility to take time to rest and relax and to take off the shoes, loosen the tie, take down the hair, and let it all hang out, as we used to say. God did not create us to be busy as bees and ants all the time. That is a truth incorporated into the very heart of the Judeo-Christian tradition with the idea of the Sabbath. At the heart of the Ten Commandments, we read, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy." And what does that mean? Well, the tradition of the Sabbath in the Scriptures, well, it's too rich and too big to boil down just to one short message today. But for our purposes today, it's important for us to consider a few truths. One, they're often ignored, but the first is that Sabbath is to be a day of rest. And the truth is based on the creation story, that God created and did creative work for 6 days, and then the seventh day, God did not work. And so God instituted this as a plan for us to follow. So God worked 6 days, rested on the seventh. God said that we are also to rest on the seventh day also. Now, our Jewish and our Seventh-day Adventist friends, they observe this Sabbath day on Saturday, which, contrary to what we often think, Sunday is not the last day of the week, it's actually the first. And so Saturday being the last day of the week is actually the seventh. And sometimes we get this mixed up. Well, most Christians, we take Sunday as the day to honor, in honor of Christ's resurrection, and so this is our Sabbath day. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of sad to see a lot of encroachments coming in on our weekend and on Saturdays. There are soccer games in clubs on Sunday mornings, and there are more businesses open, making it harder for employees to come to church on Sunday. And I don't say this to be legalistic, to be a busybody to put my values in other people, but I'm sad because working on Sunday takes many people away from their fellowship and the connection to God. And deprives people of time with family when a day of rest could be a time with family. Deprives them of the opportunity, probably the best opportunity of all, to rest and relax. And that's a problem in our society, something we have to address. The Sabbath is intended to be a day of rest, but we have to say we don't necessarily have to take Saturday or Sunday as that day of rest. Now, after all, I work on Sunday, right? You know, some people say the pastor works only 1 or 2 hours on Sunday, and that's about it the whole week. Well, of course, that's not really true, but Sunday is a day of work for me. That's what you pay me to do, is to lead this service and proclaim the word on Sunday. So how can I take a day of rest on Sunday if I'm working on Sunday? Well, traditionally, pastors take Monday off. But it doesn't really matter what day it is. If you have a job situation that's causing you to miss church because of work or something, or some kind of conflict, take some other time that's a time of rest. So we need to note that the Sabbath was created for our benefit. And however we take Sabbath rest, whether we have to carve it out of other times of the week. I remember there was a time I was working in a factory that had gone overtime, working 7 days a week and even 10 to 12 hours a day. And taking Sabbath time was difficult. But I purposed to carve it out, to have Sabbath moments at some point so that I could refocus on who I am as a child of God. So that's my encouragement to you. It isn't necessarily one strict day or even one strict moment, but it needs to be something that we all take advantage of and observe as part of who we are as God's people. And the Sabbath was created for our benefit. That is the truth about the Sabbath that is so often ignored. The Sabbath was not created for God. God is always working. God didn't need to rest on the seventh day. God wasn't exhausted when human beings were created on the sixth day. God set an example for us and something for us to follow. The Sabbath was not created for God. It was created for us. That is the point that Jesus was emphatically making in our gospel reading. The second chapter of Mark, Jesus and his disciples were going through the grain fields, as you heard, and they were traveling and they were hungry, and so it was near harvest time, and so the disciples broke the grain off the heads and they were eating as they went. Now, the harvesting was considered work. And so the legalistic attitude about this was the disciples were breaking the Sabbath because they were eating as they were walking through the field. That sounds absurd. Well, that was the legalism that the Pharisees had gotten into. And Jesus tried to change their perspective by reminding them in their own scriptures, in the Old Testament story of David before he was king, that he himself was on the run from enemies pursuing him, and he went to the tabernacle and he asked, do you have any food? And the only food available was the holy bread. And that was not normally given to ordinary people, but it was provided as an act of hospitality by the priest. And Jesus' conclusion was that the Sabbath was made for humans, and not humans made for the Sabbath. I kind of messed that up. Let's say that again. The Sabbath was made for human beings, and not human beings made for the Sabbath. Did you get that? The Sabbath was made for our benefit. And this is the point. You need one day a week in which to do no work. None. Nada. Absolutely none. Our God means for us to have one day a week in which we worship and visit friends and relatives and take a nap, maybe, or bicycle, or do things with the family. Whatever it is that helps you refresh and rekindle our minds and our bodies and our spirits. Sunday school, we're talking about stress. This is the whole concept here, that the whole idea of Sabbath is to eliminate that stress that saps our energy and makes us become unhealthy. We need that one day a week of goofing off. That is our religious responsibility. That is the first thing we need to see. And here's the second thing. Goofing off is not only a religious responsibility, it is the key to a successful life. And one of the great myths in life is of the people who succeed in the world are people who are forever keeping their nose to the grindstone. They don't waste a single moment. They're always working. They're always producing. That's a myth, my friends. If you believe that, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but it simply is not true. Hard work, dedication, sacrifice are important attributes in life, but some of the most successful people, the most efficient and productive people, are those who took time away to not work. They took time to goof off. We are told about the influential men like Charles Darwin and Herbert Spencer or John Maynard Keynes only worked 3 or so hours a day. And their leisurely approach is not widely known, and they seldom advertise it. As Ralph Keyes noted in a book called Time Lock, that he said there is far more prestige in seeming harried and overworked than in being able to get a lot done in limited amounts of time. As a result, history's non-workaholics have covered up their apparent indolence, sometimes in the most brazen way. I have all my life long been lying down till noon, Samuel Johnson once admitted. Yet I tell all young men and tell them with great sincerity that nobody who does not rise early will ever do any good. So there's a person who would tell people to get up early and do work, and yet himself didn't do it himself. And think about Benjamin Franklin, the history's famous proverb writer. Greatest, he was the source of the person who said, early to bed, early to rise. Remember what it says? Makes a person healthy, wealthy, and wise. I read a book that says that he meant that as sarcasm. He didn't really mean it as the words are meant to be, and we took him wrong. He meant it as a sarcastic jibe at people who work too much. See, he himself often stayed up late to play chess and chatted with friends. He whiled away hours tinkering with kites and bottles and keys and stoves, inventing things. After introducing the first bathtub to this country in 1790, what did he do? Franklin spent many hours soaking in the tub and reading. And he often toured while he was representing our country. It often would take long tours traveling around Europe to do leisure time in between being the ambassador that he was. He often did things to be away from work, but yet he was a Renaissance person that invented many things and accomplished many things in his life. Ralph Keyes in that book again said that he was a fraud, you might say, far wiser in his actual approach to time than what he proposed to other people. We've taken Franklin's advice, says Keyes, when we should have followed his example. Now, am I encouraging slothfulness? Not at all. Most of us by necessity have some of us by choice will always work at least 40, sometimes 50 or more hours a day, or through the week. Hours a week. Careful with that. Businesses sometimes are requiring more and more productivity out of fewer employees doing the work. But we are not robots. We're not automatons. We are human beings, and we need rest, and we need revitalization. In today's world, it's just as important to work smart and work efficient than it is to work hard. In fact, you often get more out of yourself when you're more efficient with your time than you are trying to work longer. And a lot of times people are just beginning to figure that out. If we can be more efficient, we'll get more done than it is if we just work harder. So hard work is important, but efficiency is maybe even better. Nobody was ever more committed to work, though, than Jesus of Nazareth. So much was at stake with so little time. Yet Jesus said to his disciples on more than one occasion, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place, and let's get some rest." Sometimes it did not work out as Jesus had planned, as we heard in our other scripture reading. He said, "Come on, let's go to a quiet place." Well, what happened? Everybody followed them. And that was the occasion in which Jesus fed over 5,000 people by the miracle of increasing the bread and the fish. But his original aim was to take Sabbath and get away. Because his disciples were so harried, they needed time to rest. And sometimes work follows us. But we need to diligently keep working at rest and revitalization. Jesus recognized humanity's need to loosen the strings on the bow from time to time. We all need to get away. We all need to rest and relax. So we also need a time of fellowship with God. Often when Jesus took his disciples off by themselves, it was for a season of prayer. Jesus knew that we not only need to refresh our bodies, we need to refresh our minds as well. We need to refresh our spirits also. That is why the Sabbath has always been a time of gathering together as people of God to worship, as well as a time for rest. When we come into this room, we are purposing ourselves to empty our minds of the strain and the toil of the week that has just passed. And we dedicate ourselves on the first day of the week to say, Lord, refresh me and equip me to make me a more productive person for your glory. We open up ourselves to new possibilities that God has in store for us. And if we truly worship, we should leave here feeling refreshed, ready to face the world again. There are 2 willow trees that grew by a stream a short distance from this water source on a person's property. And one of them was sturdy and rich with good leaf cover, where the other one was smaller and not as attractive, not as filled out. Over the years, the owner of the property wondered why one tree was flourishing, the other one wasn't. And he found out one time when he was digging around the trees, he found that the trees who had been planted near an old wall that had been covered over. And then the tree that was growing well was not near that wall, and its roots were going easily down to where the water source was, but the tree that was stunted was struggling to get through where this old wall was, and it was cut off from its life source. When we do not give ourselves the time to worship God, when we do not spend time communing with God and having fellowship with God, then we are like that tree that's not growing well, it's cut off from its life-giving stream. The writer of the book called Beginnings put it this way: some folks in Holland call the Sabbath God's dike. Isn't that an interesting image? Think about a lot of places in Holland are actually below sea level, and they built these walls they call dikes to keep the ocean out so that they can live on productive land. And so the Sabbath is like that. It's just like a dike that keeps the quiet Holland farmlands from being engulfed by the Atlantic. A day of rest can keep us from being engulfed by the destructive value system and corrosive pressures of contemporary society. Human beings are such pliable creatures. Immersed in the push and shove of daily living, we are in danger of being squeezed into the misshapen characters far removed from what God intended us to be. The Sabbath is God's opportunity to remold us and to reshape us into God's image. Now you might be thinking that since, well, Pastor's going on vacation, it's a good time of self-justification. And maybe there is a little bit of that. But, and I should say I thank you for giving me the opportunity to take an extended period of Sabbath to get away and to refresh with my family. And I do this in a sense of example, to saying you need to do the same thing too. And I know some of you already have taken vacation time this year. So this is my encouragement to you. However it takes, whatever you need to do to refresh and to renew, you need to do that this year. Do it on a weekly basis. Do it on an annual basis. Take time to vacation. Take time to rest and refill. Come away by yourselves, Jesus said, to a lonely place and rest a while. It's good advice. It's from Scripture. We need that time to relax with our families and friends, and we need time to worship with God. The most prolific of all authors, you might say, the author Anonymous, wrote this poem: Listen to this. Take time to laugh. It's the music of the soul. Take time to think. It's the source of power. Take time to play. It's the source of perpetual youth. Take time to read. It's the foundation of wisdom. Take time to pray. It's the greatest power on earth. Take time to love and be loved. It is a God-given privilege. Take time to be friendly. It is the road to happiness. Take time to give. It is too short a day to be selfish. Take time to work. It is the price of success. Take time for God. It is the way of life. Thanks be to God for God's incredible gifts.